Hey. I was thinking, and so I wanted to come on here and share my thoughts with you. As you may know, I am reading from my book, The Beautiful Journey, during the month of October. I really wanted people to have some insight into my story because when we think about October, we see the pink ribbons, we see people wearing pink all day long, we see the walks. But what you don't see is the journey. And so I want to take you along through part of mine, but I also want to be able to inspire, give hope, and encouragement to those who need it as they're on their own beautiful journey. Yeah, so that's the reason. Yesterday, when I did my video, I shared with you all a card that I had bought for someone that was eventually given to me as well. And I read the stanza, and each stanza, the through line was with God. With God. That is how I got through my journey. I leaned on him. I stood on his promises. Yeah, with God. Today I was trying to think, like, what do I want to talk about? And the next chapter deals with genetics. The doctors had asked me if I would do genetic counseling because they wanted to see if I was a carrier of two genes, the BRAC1 and BRAC2, BRAC1, BRAC2. Those are the genes that has an increased risk for breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And they needed to know that because it would change my treatment plan. Because if I did carry the gene, then I would have to have my ovaries removed as well. And as someone who was single without kids, I was praying that was not the case. Fortunately, I did not have the gene. And I didn't think I did because I didn't really have many people who I knew in my family that was diagnosed with cancer. The only person that I knew was my grandmother. And I shared before that she was 83 at the time when we found her, well, found out that she had cancer. I was going to say found her tumor, but it was really not hard to find because it was not lost. It was sitting right there on her boob, huge. I remember my aunt, my mother, my grandmother, and I went to dinner. It was the holidays, and we were driving out in Mentor, and this car just hits us from out of nowhere and did not pull over. So I had to literally chase this car through the streets of Mentor, through a parking lot, and it eventually pulled over. The guy came out, told us he was just coming from a bachelor's party, so had been drinking. And so we called the police. Nothing ever happened to the guys, but because my grandmother at the time was 83, we thought, you know what, it would be best if we let EMS come see her, take her to the hospital just to make sure she was okay. Because we all were shaken up. No serious injuries at the time, at least didn't know about because adrenaline had kicked in. Eventually, I had to have surgery on my shoulder, but that's neither here or there. But I remember when we were at the hospital with my grandmother, she was sitting in her hospital, in the room in the emergency department, head on her gown, opened in the front. So she said, Ann, come here and let me show you something. So I walked over there to her and she said, you see this little knot on my boob? And I look and I'm like, Grandma, like that is not little. That thing was huge. It was as big as my fist. And I have a big, big hand. I'm like, what is this? And how long have you had this? So the doctor came in and, I made the doctor aware of it. And they told us we needed to see somebody immediately. So the next day she had an appointment, found out it was cancer. She ended up having it removed. And yeah, and she lived another 20 years after that. So she was the only person who I had known at the time in my family who had gone through breast cancer. So again, I wasn't concerned that I was a carrier of the gene. But what I didn't know is my dad's side of the family. I knew some of my dad's family, but not many of them. I knew we were lupus carriers, but that was it. So in my book, I talk about my dad's side of the family because that was 50% of my DNA, right? And so I decided to share a little bit about my dad because up to this point, I hadn't talked about my dad in my book. It was always my friends and my mother. And the reason was because my dad was in Roanoke, Virginia, so he was not here to be able to be with me. And I remember I had such a hard time telling him because I had to tell him over the telephone. I called my aunt, asked her to go over there and sit with him while I made, the call so that he could have somebody there with them. I knew it was going to affect him because I was his baby. I was his youngest daughter. And his oldest daughter, my sister Crystal, which I talked about in some previous videos, she had died from cancer. So I knew that he wasn't going to take it well. But I just want to share a little bit about my dad because growing up, I was an only child on my mother's side of the family. I am my mother's only child, but my dad had 6 kids prior, 3 girls and 3 boys. And so I've known them my entire life. My mother, welcomed them. They all lived in Virginia and we were here in Ohio, but they would come up for the summers and spend time with us. So I knew my siblings. And I loved having siblings, especially growing up as an only child. I love saying my brother, my sister. I remember my one brother would be like, "Hey, sis," and it would just warm my heart. Um, so I was one of 7. 7 is my lucky number. It's the number of perfection. My birthday is 7/17/70. Like 7s were always around me. So yes, one of 7, I'm good. However, in 1994, my dad decides to introduce us to another sibling. This was a brother who was older than me and around one of the ages of my other 6, right? We met him at his wedding. He was good and grown, like in his 30s at this point. All this time, my dad never told us there was another. So now I'm one of 8, which is fine because I welcome all new siblings. So it's 8 of us. And I always felt that there was somebody else because I had heard rumors that I had an older sister. No one I know has met her, but it was always there. And so I kind of felt that. But I remember my dad went to his class reunion. It was his 55th class reunion back in 2005. And so he was so proud to come home to tell me that he won an award. So I said, "Daddy, what did you win an award for?" And he said, "For having the most kids." And I'm like, well, 8 is a lot of kids. 8 is a lot. And I said, because, in my mind, I'm still thinking that there is another one. I said, "Well, Dad, how many kids do you have?" Because I'm just trying to trick him to give me the answer. And he said, "They said I have 12. Who is they? Because who's going to tell you how many kids you have? You had to tell them 12. So who are these other 4 kids that we don't know?" My dad would never, ever, ever say anything. And unfortunately, he ended up with dementia. And so I never got an answer to who those other 4 were until 2020. After my dad had passed, I found one. And that one was found through Ancestry.com. I had a brother who I didn't know, but his daughter was on Ancestry.com and we matched. And she said, "I don't know who you are to me, but your numbers are higher than my uncle's." And I was like, "Okay, we will figure this out," and that's where I was with this. And maybe 2 or 3 days later, she sent me a picture and said, "This is my granddad." And it was my dad's obituary picture. So I'm like, "Call me now because I need to find out who you are." And so I found out that I have another brother. Have not met him in person. I've talked to him via FaceTime. Hopefully one day I'll get a chance to meet him. But my niece is so dope. I love her tremendously. It's been such a joyful relationship that has blossomed over these 4 years. She's a JAG in the Army and just really doing her thing. So, that's been a blessing. But I thought it was funny that my daddy had all these kids and never told us about the other ones. I loved my dad. My dad was such, he did, how can I put this? When I was in college, I've always been a finicky eater. When I was a little kid, my dad would come and cook. And after he and my mom separated, he would come over in the mornings and cook a pork chop sandwich and fried eggs for me to have for breakfast. Then he would make a pork chop for me to have at lunch. And I remember my silly self would trade that pork chop sandwich for a peanut butter and jelly with somebody else in my class. But that was my dad's love language, cooking. When I was in college, because I was finicky, I didn't eat the dorm food. I would eat the cereal, which was not healthy for you, but I wasn't eating that food. So what happened? My dad would cook me food every day and bring it to my dorm. That was his love language. You know, it's something, my very first internship came from him meeting somebody who was the president of BP. He happened to meet him one day just out. And he told him about me, like, hey, I got a daughter that's in engineering. You may need to meet her. And so, you know, my dad loved me. And I miss him tremendously. But, you know, the reason I decided to share this chapter with you, I was going to skip it because I was like, this really is not necessary when I got so many other things I could talk about. But my dad's birthday just passed on the 10th. He's been on my heart. And I figured I would just share that. This particular chapter is called My Genes or Not My Genes. That is the question. Or that was the question. We now know that it was not my genes. The quotation that I have for this chapter is, you don't choose your family. They are God's gift to you as you are to them. And that's a quotation by Desmond Tutu. But I also love that we don't get to choose family, but we get to choose relationships. That one sets a lot of people free because not everyone gets along with people in their families because some people are toxic. And so I hold on to that one because it's okay. That's what friends are for, right? Those are the family we get to choose. So I just wanted to share that in honor of my daddy. And to also just let you know that if you are someone who have many people in your family that's been diagnosed with cancer, especially a parent or someone close to you like that, that maybe you should get testing just to ensure that you don't carry the gene as well. I know it has saved many of lives. And so, or potentially saved many of lives, I should say, because they caught it before they even was diagnosed with cancer and they were able to proactively take action. So, yeah. So anyway, have a great rest of the day. And until the next time, thank you for taking this journey with me. Bye-bye.